Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the September 17th meeting of the Rotary Club of Marietta Metro. September 17th already, holy smoke. I would ask everybody to please, first of all, check the ringers on your cell phones, make sure they are in the silent mode. And then, if you would please stand, and I will call on Daniel Stout to lead us in our invocation and pledge of allegiance.
Thanks, let's pray. Father, we're thankful for this food. Thank you for the people that worked to prepare the food. Thank you for this crazy group of Rotarians and the fellowship that we enjoy. We ask your blessing on all of us and on this food. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Say the pledge with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Daniel. Kay Anderson, if you are ready, please come up and introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians, and if you would conduct our Carruthers Scholarship raffle.
Good afternoon. We want to welcome today, we have several guests. Chandler Breland is with us again. Thank you, Chandler. Jim Mossman, glad to see you. Yes, sir. And Mark Cornfield has a guest today.
My daughter, Angela.
Thank you, Angela. We raised around $48 for our scholarship fund today. I appreciate that. And we'll ask our speaker if she would please pull a ticket out of here. This is a your choice raffle. This can be a dinner out card, it can be a home project card, it can be a shopping card, whatever you want it to be. And the winner is 6 0 1 6 2 1 2.
You can't win your prize more than twice in a year.
Motion is moved. Congratulations, Bud. Thank you, Kay. Okay. My fellow Rotarians, it is my privilege and pleasure today to present for membership in our club, Leon Benningfield. His membership application has been reviewed and approved in accordance with our club constitution and bylaws, and I now ask Leon to please come up to the podium. Welcome back. Yep. Many of you have already met Leon, and he's visited the club a few times. We've seen him at our networking events. And Leon is a long-time believer in Rotary. I believe his Rotary service started back in a long time ago. He served in many levels of Rotary and is a past district governor. He understands the ideal of Rotary service. Our principal motto is service above self, and the object of this club and all Rotary clubs is to encourage and foster this ideal as a basis of worthy enterprise. And he shares with us in this effort. You have been approved for membership in this club because we believe you to be a worthy representative of your vocation, interested in the ideals of Rotary, and willing to do your share in translating these ideas into action. Leon, do you agree to accept the obligations of membership in this club and to obey the club's constitution and bylaws?
I do.
Thank you. I now pass along your, Leon is a transfer to us from Tipton Rotary Club. So I will award him with his pen and his badge. And I would ask everybody to, you already applauded, but please stand and give Leon a round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I met the Marietta Interact Club, one of our 3 Interact clubs, on Saturday. They served dinner over at Must Ministries at the Soup Kitchen on 41. Just wanted to let you all know that the Marietta Club is active, and they had a meeting this morning with about 25, 30 members or so. Gordy was with them last Wednesday at the Wynwood Senior Center on Whitlock Avenue, serving seniors, working on a project after school. So their Interact Club is up and running and very active, and we're very happy about that. I received an email from Ken Crowell over the weekend. A couple of years ago, Tim, when you were president, when Tim Bailey was president of our club, we participated in a book drive to collect books for people incarcerated. And that project is starting up again with us and other Rotary clubs here in Cobb County. So we are going to start our book collections in October. We will not be meeting next week. So on October 1st, if you have any used, gently used books that you are ready to donate, please bring them to our Rotary meeting. We will collect books, and then we will get them to where they need to go. Yes.
Right in my mind, there were some parameters around what kinds of books could be.
Yes, there are several rules that they want us to follow. Nothing sexual in nature, nothing that contains information on self-defense, nothing that contains information on violating laws or anything that's written in code. So, I would say that anything that, you kind of, if you question it, don't bring it. But I would say the majority of the books that we read are probably free.
No Jack.
Sorry?
No Jack Reacher books.
But I will send an email out before our October 1st meeting to remind you all, and I will include this list so everybody knows. Thank you for that. This Thursday, we are trying a new kind of social. This was set up over the summer by the president of the East Cobb Rotary Club, Anne Marie Kitts. And we were talking about socials and getting together with other Rotary clubs, and she said, well, how about if we do a social in September and I'll set it up? And so I said, great. Dave Strickerath at North Cobb, Jesse at the Marietta Club, and Anne Marie at the East Cobb Club. So the social is this Thursday, and this is at the Hoyle's Kitchen and Bar, which is, I think it used to be Sideburns. Okay. It is 1440 Roswell Road, just the other side of 41 on Roswell Road. 5:30 till 8. There's going to be a room set off in the back for all of us to gather. If any of you are interested in joining us there for the social, meet the other Rotarians from the other clubs, that would be great. We would love to see you there. Kay Anderson, would you like to talk about the women's, sorry about that, the women's dinner at the extension?
Yes. I'll try to. I just took a bite to the ladies of the club have been going periodically throughout a couple of years, feeding the ladies at the extension. It is a program, for substance abuse for young women and, women of all ages, actually. And we were unable to schedule one for the end of this year, but we are set up for January the 3rd and April the 4th. We're going to start trying to do one every quarter. And so we will do our first one in January.
Thank you, Kay. And of course, we will send out reminders as that comes closer. Randy, anything on foundation?
Nothing new to report.
Nothing new to report. Remember, if you have not sent in your contribution for the invoices that were emailed to you, please do so. We will appreciate that. As I mentioned last week, the extension is hosting a Marietta Blues Bash at the Brickyard. That is not this Thursday, but the following Thursday, September 27th. Bill, you're still good to go? And I think Kay, you're going to say the Marietta Blues Bash?
I'm going to try to.
You're going to try to. Okay, thank you. Sally, would you like to talk family of Rotary?
Just a couple items today. Brad Martin has been released now from the stem cell transplant program, yay, and will be following up with his regular physician. John Elliott is still recovering at home from his stroke. And I have a card that I'd like everybody to sign so we can send to John Elliott. So I'll start it here, and if you just kind of quickly get it around so it'll be done by the end of the meeting, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. Appreciate that. Birthdays this week. Greenie has a birthday on Thursday. I did not see her come in. And Gordy has a birthday next Sunday. Happy birthday to you. Any other Club Sunshine from the weekend? Okay.
I want to do a quick sunshine. I did have a birthday on Saturday, and I got to have all my guys home. My son from Nevada came in. And the birthday gift to me from my two sons, which I greatly appreciate and asked them to do something like this, was a donation to the Rotary Foundation.
Oh,
nice.
So I'm very appreciative of that.
Any other sunshine? Gordy.
I finally made the list, and it's in the program, my birthday. Comes this Sunday, and we're having a family gathering. My wife's the organizer of that, at a Capitol Grill, and we're going to have lots of offspring and their offspring, so it's going to be great. But I encourage all of you to look forward to hitting your 86th, as I will be doing as a It's a good time.
Happy birthday. Last call? Okay. Bill White, if you would please come up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Jim. It's my privilege today to introduce our speaker, Janet Prude, who is a former history teacher, teaching in the International Baccalaureate History. And while she was with a keen interest in the Civil War, and while studying the Civil War, she came across some interesting journals. And she's going to tell us about how she found it and how she came to write a book about it. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Janet.
Thank you for being here. I always love talking about Leroy. My younger daughter, we have two of them, and she says that Leroy's my third child, basically. And what this is the only known picture of Leroy Wiley Gresham that we have. It's taken, we think, when he was about maybe 10 years old. And behind him is a cut screenshot of the journal, one of the journals. It's one of the larger ones, about 200 some pages. There's a whole set of 7 that comprise this book, so we're outside my window. Leroy was born in 1847 into a prominent slaveholding family in Macon, Georgia. The home is still there, and it's featured on the cover of the book. It's 1842 Inn now in Macon. It's on 53 College Street, and it's, for me, when we went there in June, it was really an experience to walk into the entryway of this big, beautiful home and feel that I knew this place so well that I'd never been inside of it. So I got to learn a bit about them. Leroy kept a diary from 1860 to 1865. He started writing when he was 12, about 12 and a half, and he ended in June of 1865 at the age of 17, and he wrote almost every day, especially once the session begins, and he starts really following all those changes that were happening in Georgia society around him. He was an invalid and he was sickly, and that features in part of what makes the story so unusual. Once we got into it, this ended up being a much more layered, complex journal than we had anticipated. He's really incredibly smart. My friend in New Hampshire, we're working on a curriculum guide for teachers. She would say he's wicked smart. But he was educated, mostly home educated, and there's a reason for that. He was very kind. He worries about all kinds of people. He's curious and he's opinionated, and he's not shy about writing his opinions in his journals. Now, a journal or a diary is a private thing, right? He didn't mean for us to be reading it 150-some years later and speaking about it in front of a group like this. That was not anticipated, but what he left us was really rich with information and insight into the Civil War. Now, I met Leroy on Facebook, is what I like to say. You notice by my footwear here, I've had some medical issues, and I was home on medical leave after Achilles surgery, and was starting to get a little restless, a little bored, you might even say. I was spending too much time on Facebook. And up popped an article in my news feed about the journals. It was written by a Washington Post author named Michael Ruane, and he really hit a home run with that article because I was immediately intrigued. I've taught 9th and 12th grade advanced high school history for 16 years. Class of 2000 was my first class. And I saw that, and I've always tried to have kids go back to primary sources, original information. It's the most reliable, it's the best way to get as close to the actual event as possible. And what better way to teach them about the Civil War than to do it through the eyes of somebody who was observing it. And then I read a couple other things that I thought was interesting, that he had a leg injury, but nobody knew how it happened. And he had what the author called bed sores on his back. And I thought, oh, that's really sad. I wonder what was going on there. And then he wrote, they'd never been published. And then I thought, oh, wow. Well, for about the 3 years prior to that, I'd been working on researching a historical fiction story, partly because one of the people who was involved in the action in the story didn't leave any written record, so there's no way to document what she actually did. But I've been kind of poking Ted Savas Beatty, who is one of the premier publishers of Civil War related material, to see if he'd read my manuscript, the first 100 pages or so, and he kept telling me, we don't do fiction. We don't do fiction. But I said this to him, being the only person I do in publishing, and said, please read this and tell me if you've heard of this. Has anybody actually published this? Because the article originally was written in 2012, and he said no. He'd never heard of it. He was just as intrigued as I was. He checked with all kinds of contacts that he had in publishing and academia. Nobody had heard of this young man's writing. So we very quickly, big long story short, within a year, we had this finished and we were in Macon doing our first presentation. If you leave teachers who are used to dealing with a lot of work alone too long, you know, we get bored. So I was able to get that done. But it's considered one of the jewels in their collection. And I worked with digitized material like this here. You can't actually go in and tell them you want to look at the Gresham diaries. They'll just say no. I'm still trying to get permission to actually see them. One day I hope I will. but it's all digitized, which was great because when we had problems reading it, we could take screenshots, put them into another program and kind of manipulate them so we could get the nib lines, usually is what we were looking for. The scratches where the ink didn't go into the paper. But it's a jewel in their collection, and hopefully one day we'll actually get to see them. But they gave us a whole lot of information. This is his father, John Jones Gresham. This image is said to be him in front of his 1842 home that he had built, and on his horse prints. Originally, John Gresham was a lawyer, but he didn't care for the practice of law. So when his partner died, he was an older man, when he died, John said, I think I'm done practicing law and I'm going to do some other things. He ran for mayor of Macon and won on 2 occasions. At this point in history, Macon elected a mayor every year. Could you imagine? Also, and it's relevant to the story, they elected governor in Georgia every other year. Also kind of scary. So he did that, and as a businessman, he was president of the Macon Manufacturing Company. It was a cotton mill in Macon, a few blocks from his home actually, and it would take cotton from all the growers in the community and produce cotton fabric of different various types. So that's going to be relevant as well too. He was successful with this. He owned about 100 slaves on 2 plantations that were side by side, about 30 miles south and east of Bibb County, where Macon is located. And the librarians at the University of Georgia Math Library were very, very helpful to me after they stopped laughing when I was pronouncing it Houston County. You're not from around here. No. Because I learned it was Houston County. And they provided me with tax records, the plots of where the surveyed drawings were that outlined where each one of the tax plots were located. And they used ArcGIS to impose today's world on top of this 1870s map we were using. And that's what we came up with as far as locating where the plantations are. And the map is in the book. We had a cartographer draw that up. But it was within an easy 1 day's ride with a wagon and a horse to get from the plantations up to the home in Macon. So it was, the two were intertwined extremely well. This is Mary Eliza Baxter Gresham, Leroy's mother. We think this is towards the end of her life. And we see it's a rare image of Mary in the 1870s. We actually think it's a little bit later now. Within the past week, I mean literally since I left Virginia to do this trip about a week ago, we have found more photographs. We've had extended family of the Greshams send us letters, photographs, all kinds of information. And you can go to the book's Facebook page or outside my window, and there you can see a picture that was taken in the late 1840s when Mary was about 24 years old, maybe 24 to 28 years old, and it's a hand-painted daguerreotype. It's really unusual, but we were able to look at this photograph. You see the way that she holds her body, her facial structure. We were able to place that that's the same woman. So we have a picture of her when she's much younger. But we don't know a lot about her except for what we read in Leroy's journals. You can find out a lot about her husband because he was very civically involved. He was heavily involved in the education of the poor with free schools. He was on the board of directors for the blind and deaf asylum that they had in Macon at the time. That was one of the things that he was very involved in, especially after the war during Reconstruction. So there's a lot known about him. There's a lot known about the 2 siblings that Leroy had, but not much that you can find about Mary, and we've looked. So she comes back to life through the pages of her son's journal. We get to know her a little bit. And the same is true of the slave members of the household. We get to know who these people were, what they were like, and the personalities through the pages of his journals, which is kind of remarkable. He was their favorite child in a really, really close family, and a large extended family. Again, a journal, when you're writing in something like this, the author knows who the people are that he or she are writing about. But when you started talking about Cousin Eliza and Uncle John and Baby Tracy, I didn't know who any of those people were, how they were related to him, how they fit into his life. So I ended up with an Ancestry.com family tree for the Greshams that has 1,700 individuals. And I still can't find out where the 3 Knox brothers from Alabama fit in there. But I do know they're related. One of the people at one of my presentations is a relation to them, and they were able to tell me that. Thomas, and actually this photograph we have found out again in the past week or so, is not Thomas and Leroy. We were told when we were given this photograph that it was Thomas and Leroy. But in 1850, the way photographs were taken, you'd have to get those children to be stock still. Anybody ever try to get a 2-year-old to stay still? Not easily done. And there's a couple of other clues as well. Just the informal setting is not what you would have seen then. It would have been a very stiff pose. The amount of time needed for the exposure was long at that point. So you had to have, they actually had clamps that they would put on the back of people's heads to keep their heads from wobbling. So when you see Civil War images that are outdoors, and they do exist, if you ever see horses in them, guess what? You see the body of the horse, the head's wiggling, it's all fuzzy because the horse is moving. So we figured that's later. And then I have some friends who are heavily involved in historical clothing. And they told me, when I posted this in the group on Facebook, it says, what can you tell me about this image? And that's all I said. They said 1880s. How do you know that? Well, the boy in the back is wearing a little Lloyd Fauntleroy suit. I didn't know that. I'm not a clothing historian. That book that it was based on was popular. I feel like the Harry Potter of the time period, I guess. It was not published until the mid-1880s. So that helps us date the photograph as well. But we did find out that those 2 children are related. They are his sister Minnie's youngest 2 sons. So, and they're on the same porch. She was a couple of years younger than him, the only daughter in the family, and I like to call her the original Mimi. Thomas and Leroy, though, were very, very close. 3 years apart in age, and they had a secret language that only the 2 of them understood. This is common from what I understand with twins and children that are born very close together. But not 3-year-olds. They spent a lot of time together to develop that kind of communication and relationship. So they were extremely close. And this comes out in the journals. When Thomas goes away, Leroy is miserable, and he says he's miserable. What am I going to do without Thomas? And when he goes off to fight, when he goes off to the war, he's even more worried because he thinks maybe he won't come home. So he's very concerned. You get a glimpse of a young girl's life in this time period as well. Also within the past week, this is also on Facebook, we've identified Minnie in a picture when she was about 13 years old, wearing a silk gown with the pagoda sleeves, rich with lace in the undersleeves. Lace collar is very intricate. She has her hair done up, but long in the back, like a girl of 13 would. You didn't put all of your hair up until you were much older. And it shows a young, very, very serious-looking young lady. And she was extremely well-educated for her time period as well. She went to the first accredited women's college in the United States, Wesleyan Female College in Macon. And after the war, their grandmother, they had one grandmother who survived into the Civil War. That grandmother, their maternal grandmother, her older brother had never married and was very wealthy, both in the North and in the South. His history is extremely interesting on its own. But he sent both Minnie and her cousin Seda Bird off to college in Baltimore so they could get a good education at a college that hadn't been destroyed, it was still Southern. So she met her husband there. They had 2 younger siblings that died very young. Edmund, who was named after John Gresham's brother, Edmund. We know that this baby died of, Ted told me it was pneumonia. He's got a whole cache of letters that I haven't seen yet. I'm dying to go through them. But John wrote to his brother saying that your namesake has passed away with pneumonia. He was 7 months old. And Edward, who was 17 months old when he passed away. And both those babies are laid to rest at Rose Hill with the rest of the family. But why the diary? Well, we were able with some research to find a contemporary of Leroy's who had written his memoirs when he was an older man, and he recounted this incident and even talks about the little boy whose leg was crushed. They had found out during school that one of the buildings in town had burned, and boys being boys, they decided they were going to go investigate. So they went downtown and they're climbing around inside this burned out, unstable structure, when one of the boys notices that the brick chimney that was still standing is starting to wobble. And they all cut out of there. And in the melee, Leroy is caught by the falling brick. And it destroys his left leg. He's never really able to use it again. For the first few years, he is able to get up and around. We have a letter where his father tells his mother, who was visiting her mother in Athens, Georgia, that he's trying to tell Leroy, don't slide on the ice. He says, no, Father, I just watch. But after that, he was not able to use the leg for walking. It was probably growth caused that to happen. So he was pulled around by a wagon. Now, we don't know what the wagon looked like. Wheelchairs really weren't invented until, because of the Civil War. We had a large number of amputees who needed mobility, and they developed the wheelchair really after the war. But he was pulled around town by a wagon. I think it was built by one of his uncles. Uncle Richard, who was 7 years older, gave him a wagon for Christmas one year, and either a slave companion they had brought up from the Houston plantations named Allen pulled him, or his brother Thomas, or friends, or one time his sister, but she and her friend kept falling over, so it didn't work too well. He started developing a cough in 1857. And by 1860, some of these letters, we know he has back abscesses. So they're not what the Washington Post author thought. They weren't bed sores. They were abscesses of a different kind. Okay? So he's got these other symptoms that aren't consistent with a broken leg. You don't break your leg and then develop a cough usually, right? So we didn't know what was going on. We do know that he got the diary because his father was taking him to Philadelphia. He was going on this grand adventure. He's 12 years old. He's going to see Dr. Joseph Pancoast in the summer of 1860. Dr. Joseph Pancoast, we discovered, was the first American surgeon to kind of play around with what we call today plastic surgery. And our theory is that John Gresham took his son to see this surgeon to see if possibly he could fix the sores in his son's back. If he did do this, and we don't know for sure that he did or not, Dr. Pancoast would have said no. He couldn't do it. There was a good reason for that, which we'll get to. But he starts writing in this gift from his mother. And you can see she's included a biblical reference in there for safe travel. She signed it, his sister and his brother. You can see over there, it was 1860. He actually, on that left-hand side of the page, writes his name twice. One, he capitalizes the R in his name, the other one he doesn't. He switches back and forth. So we decided to go with the capital R because when his father writes the very last entry that talks about his passing, we saw the capital R, so we left it with that. Then we go back, is it Leroy or Leroy? Okay. We don't know. They called him Lloyd for short. That's how they knew him in the family. So he starts writing off like a 12-year-old would. Very short, choppy sentences, very common, what I would see in ninth graders. He was well educated. He read everything he could get his hands on. This kid is reading Shakespeare when he's 13 and 14 years old and enjoying it. He's reading Les Miserables as it comes out in a serial form. That's how many books were published. They would do sections at a time in a publication. So he's waiting for the fourth part of Les Miserables to come out. I'm very excited when he gets it. He loves mathematics. Because he's not going to a formal school, even though there's a private school across the street, He's getting math tutoring from his brother and from another young man named Jim Campbell, who ended up with the rank of major in the Civil War. And they would send math problems across town to see how quick they could solve these problems. And go back and then try to catch mistakes in each other's work. And that's how he's getting educated in mathematics. And when Thomas goes off to college and Jim goes into the Army, Leroy says, well, that's it for my math education. No one else can help me with it now. That's how advanced he was. As far as chess goes, he was a really, really good chess player. He knew all the major entry moves. He read chess books, chess magazines. He knew all the personalities. I had a lot to learn about chess. I don't play checkers very well, but he ended up playing one of the socialites in town. He was very surprised to learn that Mrs. Whittle, who gave a party for all kinds of people, she really enjoyed entertaining. They had a very large home, very large staff in their home. She was an excellent chess player. And Leroy made it his goal to beat her and make her work for him, so he could beat her legitimately. She would sometimes play Leroy and two of his friends simultaneously, play all three of these boys at the same time. And that was quite a surprise for him to find out that this lady plays chess, and very well indeed. And science, he loved science, and one of the first places he went to in Philadelphia was a science museum, and he says, there's like 500 skulls in here. That's the kind of thing that a young boy would really get into. He's inquisitive, talkative, he's sweet, he's funny, he's kind. You don't really get a vibration of somebody who is irritated with anybody. He really doesn't give you that impression at all. He loved pets. He does not have good luck with pets, however. Some of his pets end up with rather quick sad ends. But he seemed to have a good relationship with everyone. And the last 2 puppies that he had were brought to him by a man named Howard, who was a slave in the household, who seemed to be kind of the one who was running the household behind the scenes. Leroy seemed to have a lot of affection for this man, and learned how to plant cantaloupes. He loved cantaloupes, and all kinds of things from Howard. He's opinionated, and he's not shy about his opinions, even sometimes when they're shown to be incorrect. He had an opinion about just about everything. He was thrilled to death that he was allowed to go with when this picture of his brother, which we got about a month ago, was taken. It's an ambrotype. They were very excited to have it done in his uniform. We were excited to get it from one of the descendants because we never thought we would find it. I've been looking through different archives to see if they had it. But this is Thomas, taken in February 1864 before he went away into the Army in Northern Virginia, where he worked with a topographical team in the valley. But he really did not like this photograph. This is not the funny, getting into trouble, mischievous Thomas with whom he shared a common secret language. This is a serious, different kind of Thomas that he's seeing. He said that this photograph was an utter failure. He just didn't like it. And the entries include some Mark Twain witty phrases. We know he's got his left leg crushed towards about 1864. He starts complaining about his right leg drawing up. We didn't know what that meant. But he said, if I'm going to have this happening to my right leg pretty soon, I'm not going to have a leg to stand on. And he gives us all kinds of details, including the long technical names for the medications he's given. I would say they put this kid through the pharmaceutical roulette. Let's give him something and see if it sticks and helps him become something. But he wrote out one long one and he said, it stinks. And it's got a name that could kill anything. I hope it works. Unfortunately, it didn't. But even when he's going through all that, he's got a great sense of humor. He's a funny kid. You get a really unique inside view of Southern family life at this point in time. Leroy doesn't leave the home except once. They went when he was 13 years old to spend a month in Athens with his grandmother. And he was not happy there because Athens didn't have the telegraph, and he wanted all the news when it came out. He didn't want to have to wait, and he had to wait for news when he was in Athens. but you get to see what life was like. He describes the food, especially the desserts. This kid had a sweet tooth. You know, somebody gets married in town, they send Leroy cake. They send him syllabub, which is cake with wine poured on it. They send him all kinds of sweetness things. It's just crazy. But, you know, he's a kid, he likes the sweet food. He talks about the clothing. For example, when his sister wears her first homespun dress, that's a big deal, because someone of Minnie's stature would be wearing the silk, like the gown I described earlier, that you can see on Facebook. She wouldn't be wearing homespun. But that message says that if Minnie Gresham is wearing homespun, socially, I can too. It's okay that my family's, you know, we're starting to become poor. We can't afford, you know, the nice fabrics we used to have. So her making a palmetto hat was also a big deal. And he talks about the different stages of that hat making. And his sister's knitting and doing all kinds of things. So you get the conversations, the interactions, and the huge stream of visitors that came through here. This is where Ted and I had a little bit of a disagreement there for a while, except I think we'll win this one. We have footnotes at the bottom that describe some of the things. We didn't want to interrupt Leroy's writing, so we put footnotes in where we felt they were necessary. And two visitors struck me as a teacher of 20th century history. Woodrow Wilson's father was a guest in the Gresham home. The Greshams were Presbyterian, as was Woodrow Wilson's father, who was a minister in Augusta, which I already knew because I teach 20th century history. He was a guest in the home, and they'd have presbyteries that would come and visit with the Greshams. Also, Woodrow Wilson's, his future wife's grandfather, Reverend Axon, was also a guest in the home. Ted's like, how is that important? I said, because it pulls you into the future, because people are connected in the past, and they're also connected in the future. So he goes, oh, okay, we'll leave it in there. But you have people like Alexander Stevens. You don't know who he was? Vice President. He used to deliver mail to Grandma from Richmond when he would go back and forth. She thought he was safer than the regular mail system. That's quite a mailman to have at your service there. So we follow the Greshams from the peak of their influence, and they can buy just about anything, to the point where in 1864 at Christmas, Leroy writes, we don't know where we're going to be next Christmas. Things have changed so much in our lives, we really don't know. They've gone from heating the house with coal to having the servants go out along the railroad lines. Fortunately, there were several in Macon, it was a railroad hub, and having them pick broken pieces of wood up from along the railroad tracks to use in their home. These are some of the wealthiest people in town. A few months before Leroy passes, his father is trading silver, the family silver, to buy his son a steak so he could have a nutritious meal. That's how much their lives have changed. So we see a lot of impact there. And again, I spoke about the list of biographies, especially the family members, because when the family tree I was talking about in Ancestry, there's like 60 women that are named Mary. And I was able to nail them. I wanted to know who they were. Didn't want to just guess. One thing that makes this really interesting and different from a lot of the civilian works that we have on the Civil War, which are mainly written by women, is that he follows the politics of secession really closely and comments on them. So he really starts writing when secession happens in the winter of 1860. He loves Jefferson Davis, and he's picking this up from his father as well. His father thought Davis had a good speaking style, and his speeches were well prepared, and Leroy mirrors that, just like my ninth graders would. I'm glad I was not in the class for this last election. That would have been a tough one, because the kids will come in and they mirror what they hear at home. It's normal. Their parents are a huge influence in their lives. Same with him, only a few years into this, we see him making a really huge intellectual leap. And he's making all sorts of more adult-like associations, analysis. He's coming up to his own prognostications. And sometimes they're at odds with his father. He writes almost apologetically, I don't agree with him on this. I think if we hold Augusta and, Richmond and Atlanta, we'll be okay. Papa doesn't think so. He thinks we're done for. So you can see him thinking things through on his own, which for someone of that age, especially when we get more detail for you into his medical condition, you'll see it's quite remarkable. He was young, so as I said, he mirrored his father's views, and they were happy about secession. And he mocks Lincoln consistently. And it's kind of amusing, some of it. Some of it is, you just know that he's a young kid, so he's hearing this, and he's writing it down. One of the first battles in Fairfax, I'm from Fairfax County, Virginia, was a little skirmish. The Union Army came into Fairfax Courthouse, as it was called at the time. They're pushed back by the Confederates, and as Leroy put it, we know what Lincoln's done. He's gotten all the drunkards out of the tavern, given them guns, and sent them to the courthouse. It wasn't quite like that, but that's what they wanted to think. So it's amusing when he does this. And he also has little sketches, a little sketch where he's got a little guy with this huge gun that says Jack the Giant Killer on the gun, and he's shooting at a guy with a stovetop hat whose arms are like out here. So you know he's aiming at Lincoln. But it's quite, some of them are amazing. And Ted wanted to know, why do you keep sending me these little things that he's writing? Like, he'd write his name in different ways in the margins. And little drawings and things. I said, because that's what kids today do. If I walked around my classroom, I could see kids today doing the same thing. They practice writing their names. I can also tell you who his crushes were, just by what he was writing at the time. This is one of his excerpts about the Battle of Richmond. It was 1864, Battle of the Wilderness. It was Robert E. Lee. His favorite general was Joe Johnston. And he spent 4 years recording the course of the entire war. And it goes nicely chronological because that's how he got the information. So if you're not very conversant in all the different battles, Leroy, you can follow this. One of my friends who I grew up with, she said, I've forgotten everything that I've ever read about the Civil War, everything they ever taught us. I said, don't worry about it, he'll tell you. And we put footnotes in. One of the battles he talks about, again, in 1861, is about 5 miles from where my house is. It's the Battle of Ball's Bluff. He calls it the Battle of Leesburg. Well, historians will say, what? Battle of Leesburg? No, it's the Battle of Ball's Bluff. So we put in the footnotes, known historically. If you look it up, it's the Battle of Ball's Bluff. So we hope you follow it. Leroy writes about all the theaters. He writes about the Trans-Mississippi. He writes about Vicksburg. He writes about the privateers going through the blockade. And he writes about all the Navy battles. He really, really keeps a good track on everything. So it's very, very complete. I guess a lot of it is from his father, from the newspapers, from letters that come home from the front, from magazines and other adults that visit the home. He wants to know their views on things and talks to them like adults. He follows Georgia extremely well to find out where they are, because people he knows are in these units. And there are perceptible mood swings. We can see it when things are going well. That shows in his mood. He'll write a little bit more during these periods. And then when he finds out things are not doing so well, he gets a little bit unhappy about that. They followed the Sherman campaign extremely well because guess what? Macon was attacked once. They're occupied at the end of the war. When the cavalry came through, Spelman's cavalry actually was captured. They were going through trying to liberate Andersonville, but they got captured at Macon. Leroy's watching all of this. He's watching the bombardment coming across the Ocmulgee from the ridge on the other side from the rooftop. Somebody must have carried him up to the roof because there's only a really narrow passageway. And he's watching it when the Cannonball House gets hit. If you're familiar with Macon, there's a house called the Cannonball House. He watched it. The people who were living in there scattered. They were out of town real quick. They said, we've had enough of this. So, and processing the news, this is probably one of the things that we found really compelling, was everything he reads and hears, he has to learn is not quite true. They weren't really just drunks gathered up outside of a tavern that they sent into Fairfax Courthouse. They may not have been well trained yet, but they soon would be. and he learns to have some respect for that. His hopes get really high and are often dashed. And my friend who had forgotten everything about the Civil War, she wrote me, she said, why is it every time they have these battles, there's like no Confederate losses and all the losses are federal? I said, that's because it's fake news. You're dealing with fake news on a regular basis. It's not a new thing. All the news came in, they wanted to pump up the civilian population, keep them from worrying. And then the way they would get news was kind of inconsistent. They had no way, for example, on either side, to let a family know that your loved one has been killed or wounded, or if they were wounded, where they were. It all came through the telegram. And then the telegram had to go into the newspaper and be printed. So you would see lists of wounded in the newspaper. And sometimes those weren't correct. John Bell Hood, when he gets his leg wounded here in Georgia, it's like, first he's dead, then he's not dead, then he's okay, and then he's like, oh, he's lost the leg. And then it goes back and forth. So they have to wait. And his diary lets us see how civilians process this. And this is something that the people who write about specific battles, they may know everything about Gettysburg, but they don't know how the people back home process Gettysburg. For example, this says, Tuesday, July 7th, 1863. Leroy knows the Army of Northern Virginia has crossed the, they've crossed over the Potomac, they're in Maryland, he wants to know, is anything happening? Mr. Clisby comes over and says, well, there's been a small skirmish. Mr. Clisby thinks it was not a large affair. It was Gettysburg. This today actually is the anniversary of Antietam. Leroy said that when it all came down to the end of Antietam, everybody that they knew who was in that battle was either dead or wounded. There wasn't one person who came out of that unscathed from who Leroy knew. There were 93 slaves on the 2 plantations. We went through the 1860 census, the slave schedule, which is separate from the regular census, which has everybody's names in the household. Slave census doesn't have any of the names. It has age, gender, and degree of color. So there's no identifiers for the people down in the plantations except for who Leroy talks about coming up or going down. And some of the people who come up, like Frank is a skilled carpenter. He really knows how to fix things, and he builds Leroy special things for his own particular needs. He puts wheels on some of the furniture so it can go around. It was easy to figure out who the 8 were in the Gresham household, which was in the Bibb County slave schedule, because he talks about them all. Everybody from 3-year-old Florence, who was 3 in 1860, up to there were 2 35-year-olds working in the home. He mentions them by name, and like Julie Ann, it's just a regular sentence, but he put a whole lot of effort into his handwriting of her name. He had gorgeous handwriting, by the way. I'm one of those passive-aggressive teachers that used to make PowerPoints with cursive fonts. I could, you can't read them. I said, you will. And they did. But he described how the plantation crops would come up. Cotton, different parts of the hogs, when they would slaughter the hogs, it would tell you how many pounds, the biggest hog they slaughtered. Other things that they would come up with, honey, when that came up, that was a good thing for him. And then how the family supported the people back down in the plantations. Sending down clothing, sending down doctors. There was a small epidemic. And they sent the family doctor who was treating Leroy down for a couple of weeks to treat the slaves on the plantation to make sure everybody was healthy. Some of the people were related. Ella, one of the other housemates, Juliana was a housemaid. All of a sudden, Leroy just knows Ella's gone. They sent her down to the plantation. He didn't know why. And a few days later, he goes, Ella's sister died. That's why they sent her down there, so she could say goodbye before her sister passed. It's important, though, when you're reading through this, that to remember that slavery was part of his everyday life. He was born into this, grew up with this. He uses words that today I kick kids out of my classroom for using. He uses them as descriptors, not as pejoratives. He's not trying to push anybody down. He's just describing who people are. using the terminology of the time period. He doesn't talk about the ethics of slavery. He talks very briefly at the end about emancipation. Again, probably echoing his father when he says that it should be done slowly. That was in the beginning of 1865. It's the only comment he makes on it directly. As you gather by now, he's terminally ill. What does it say over there? Yeah, saw off my leg. He felt that all of the troubles he had was due to that leg injury. In a way, it was. LeRoy had a form of tuberculosis, and he was never told about it. His parents made the conscious decision not to inform their son of what he had. I think it was because it would have crushed his spirit. And when you read this, you realize what an incredible spirit this kid has. To go through all the stuff he's going through, to have this happening to his vertebrae. Whoa. Can't see. You see how it's deteriorating? He had a form of TB that ate through the body. So the sores on his back were not bed sores. They weren't just regular sores. It's where the tuberculosis was exiting his body. Yeah. We did not know that about 70% of people in this time period had tuberculosis in their systems. But like most people, their bodies were healthy, so they were able to suppress it, and it never became a problem. What we theorize is that when LeRoy's leg was crushed, his immune system went to try and do what it could with the leg. And it allowed the TB to emerge. So that's why a couple of years later he starts to cough. He never has the cough where you spit blood on the handkerchief. That's never one of his symptoms. That would have gotten him asking questions. He was smart enough to know. But this was unusual kind of tuberculosis. It was called Pott's disease. And again, it eats through the body, which is why Dr. Paritos would have said no to closing the sores on his back. It would have had to come out somewhere. It's already emerged. Just let him rest. He tells LeRoy, rest, here's some more medication. Just keep him comfortable, is basically what they were told. So it still exists in some parts of the third world. I have a physician who is from Pakistan. He says, oh, he's very familiar with it. I was telling him about the book, and tell everybody about the book. I guess I'll order at Starbucks the other day. But he said that in his part of Pakistan, that some people who cannot get to good medical treatment, or they don't know what the disease signs are, and they let it go too long, end up with these kinds of distortions to their back that kind of stick outward. It's not like scoliosis, it's sideways. It's almost like a hunchback. He wrote about the symptoms, remedy, pain, treatments in great detail. And we couldn't, my publisher and I, could not agree or come up to any consensus on what it was that kills LeRoy in the end. Because he doesn't know. So how can he tell us? He doesn't know. So we took the symptoms and remedies, all that. I pulled that out of the narrative when we sent it out to one of Ted's other authors. And he came back, he is a Hopkins-trained surgeon in Michigan. He came back a couple of weeks later and says, I've got your diagnosis. He's got Pott's disease. And sure enough, that's what he has. And I've got two books with me today. Dr. Rosbach's book has just come out. It gives you more detail on tuberculosis, the history of it, why they selected some of the treatments that they did for LeRoy. They're giving him everything from lavender to make him calm, to certain kinds of teas that are supposed to help, to giving him mercury, which is a poison. He was taking a lot of, especially at the end of his life, more and more narcotic drugs. But we also found out from Dr. Rosbach that this is the only tuberculosis account written by a patient ever, especially in the 19th century. So you get, for medical people, this gives them a really good sense of what Pott's disease with no treatment, no real treatment anyway. They're just trying to make the kid comfortable, that this is what it can do to somebody. So it's important for people who are studying medicine. The eventual Southern defeat depresses Leroy, and he notices. He says, I'm getting more and more pessimistic about this whole thing. You know, what's going to happen next? Especially when Macon is occupied, and they've got kind of a truce between the two sides. So you've got Federal soldiers and Confederate soldiers walking the streets together, kind of eyeing each other. And then John Gresham comes up with the idea, maybe I can make it so they're not going to go and destroy my house with looting if I have an officer staying here. So he invites a major who's been wounded and his corporal to come and stay in their home. So they have protection, the home was protected. But this made things difficult for Thomas, who had come back from the front and was working for a topographical unit in Georgia. So he was using his home as a base and going out to these different counties to do his work. And Leroy says one morning that when they came down, and the two officers, his brother and this Union officer at the breakfast table, he goes, it was kind of tense. But he's getting weaker. He's taking more morphine, more opium. And the pain he describes is really horrendous. And as I said before, he starts to worry because his good leg is drying up. So I think it probably was affecting his lower back that would cause his leg to change its shape. Journaling took his mind off of it. He was writing every day at this point. Although the handwriting started to change. When you've gone through 6 of these journals and you notice that's not his handwriting. There's something going on here. We've investigated that and we found out that his mother was taking dictation. The last time Leroy writes in his notebook is, I think, about May 23rd. And on June 8th, 1865, we have the last entry. You can see I am very clearly. It took us a while to decide that the last word, which fades as it's written, was perhaps. Because she wasn't writing very hard, the ink wasn't going into the paper, and that was the last thing. We don't know what he said afterwards, but it was something that just made his mother probably distraught. She wrote, we include this in there, a really heartbreaking, hard-to-read letter to her sister that describes the 10 days that followed that entry to his death on June 18th. And he's chronicling the decline of the Old South along with his own decline as well. He dies on June 18th, about 2 months after Appomattox, and the end of the Confederacy. So he's giving us the only male, non-combatant account of the Civil War from a male perspective. He's interested in the battles, in the politics, in the economics. He picks up on economic errors that could have made a big difference for the Confederacy. They're all still planting cotton. He says, why are they doing that? They should be planting food. You know, they're not taking care of the poor people. Who's taking care of the widows and children? His father comes up with a scheme to do that so these people can be clothed and still have food. It is the only, like I said, the only account by a patient of tuberculosis where they're writing about their symptoms without any intervening medication. It's kind of like, and people have suggested this to me, but when Ted asked me to look at other memoirs, I couldn't find anything that was contemporary that was like this. So the closest I can think of is the Diary of Anne Frank, but there's obvious differences. Anne was hiding from a regime that was out to kill her. Leroy is being held back. He couldn't go to school, he couldn't go to church, he couldn't attend the weddings or the funerals or anything because he had a contagious disease he didn't know about. So he's outside of society. They're both watching their worlds collapse in front of their eyes as teenagers, as extremely eloquent writers. So that's where they kind of merge together. Circumstances are different. But I hope you'll give it a read. It's been a real privilege for me to work with this. This is an incredible find. And that's my presentation. Do you have any questions? Yes?
There's a Mary Eliza Trace out of West House, you know, got related to his mother.
It's possible. Actually, Actually, Mary and Elizabeth, those are the names that happen most frequently. There are like 80 women that had named Elizabeth or Eliza that I have to sort through. But that's possible. I found, and I've actually met Greshams that have come up to me and said, I'm a Gresham. They're interested now in looking to see where they hook into this tree if they do it all. So it's possible. But they would repeat the names all the time. His middle name was actually his mother's maiden name.
Jan, we really appreciate you being here. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Casey, would you like to make a quick introduction of our visitor who showed up?
Sure. Nisha Vajayan, is that right? Yes. Okay. We've been in touch by email. She expressed interest on Rotary.org, and we finally had a chance to connect. She's recently had a child, so she's able to join us today. So welcome.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you also to our other visitors. Chandler, good to see you again. Jim Mossman, thanks for coming. Angela, thanks for being here today. Leon, congratulations. And if Daniel would please stand, he'll lead us in the four-way test and we'll be adjourned.
Very good. The four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?